All right, John, thank you for joining me, and let's just get into this data. And what's so exciting about the work that you do at LIS is it is data driven. So before we get into the data, what does LIS do, and kind of give a sense of what your scope of work is?
Sure. Thank you, Alyssa. It's a delight to be with you again. Leading Indicator Systems is a human capital consulting, research, and assessment firm. We build human capital assessment solutions for our clients and partners, and we conduct primary research around issues of facing the American workforce. So that's us in a nutshell.
And you've been doing these listening studies for a while now. About how long?
Yeah, well, actually, that was a new initiative we'd been contemplating. And then when COVID hit, it became crystal clear. This is something we absolutely needed to do. And so we're now on our third workforce listening study. They come out every 3 to 4 months. And we're just releasing the results of Workforce Listening 3.
Well, I've been privy to getting some highlights, which we're going to share here on this video. But in terms of going into this particular listening study, this Q2, there were certain expectations given that we did turn a corner in COVID with vaccination. People were finally, kind of realizing that work from home wasn't such a terrible thing, although there are some challenges, of course. And I'd like to just kind of throw the obvious question to you, John, is like, what was the biggest surprise that you found, given the expectations and given the data that you collected?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Everything you just said is spot on. And so we've seen in the data a turning of the corner. People now, for the first time, the majority of people think that the worst is behind us. And increasing numbers believe that governments should, and by extension companies, should start reopening the economy and work. The surprising part was that notwithstanding that, the level of stress, anxiety, burnout, all of the negative outcomes that we hoped were in our past, in fact, are worse than ever. We're at our wits' end as a workforce, and it was really surprising to us how bad the situation is.
Can you give us a little bit better sense when you say it was worse than you thought?
Yeah, so just here are some standard survey data that we collected during Workforce Listening 3 and comparing it to our prior waves over the last year, looking at just after the pandemic, kind of last fall when things were, at their worst, if you will, and now. We've really, it's come home for American workers. It's personal now, more than double the number of people who have been personally affected by COVID in this wave. So for instance, we asked, do you know someone who's personally tested positive for COVID-19? At the outset of the pandemic, it was about 27%, up to 46% by wave 2. It's now up to 66%. So 2/3 of people know somebody who's been directly affected. Almost a third of people have been infected themselves, just around just under 30%, but a large minority. And almost 40% know someone personally who has died. So number one, it's come home to us in very real terms. I think when we drill down into the data at a more granular level and look at the stresses, that's where it really comes home. And it's kind of the rule of 1 and 3. When we asked people about a whole range of outcomes, 1/3 responded extremely concerned. 1/3 extremely concerned about their own mental health, about their vulnerability to addiction, about the potential loss of income or employment. 1/3 about coming in contact with infected people, 1/3 about their own health, and the health of their families. It just goes on and on and on. And all of these numbers, I can just reel off some of the percentages: 100% increase, 125% increase, 62% increase, 76% increase in respondents indicating extreme concern about those issues. So it really is a raw edge.
Yeah, and again, the expectation was that it should have been better. People should have been feeling better, but in fact, you're seeing they're feeling worse, and actually a lot worse, which is depressing.
Yeah.
You know, some of what you also look for in the studies, and I'm really, this is what kind of got my attention originally, is you're looking for what are the motivators, like what are the things that people are looking for from their employment and their employers. And those things have also really shifted in this last study, John. So can you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, work is increasingly difficult. So just by way of introduction, we measure resiliency and the ability of people to get work done. Companies responded valiantly early on with efforts to get people up and running from home. Computers, laptops, printers, internet access, all the things that were obvious low-hanging fruit. But increasingly, many companies have turned a deaf ear to what is a much more insidious challenge, which is the emotional stress of long-term work from home, surrounded by, disruptive families, kids that ought to be in school, you name it, such that, where in wave one, 2/3 of people found it challenging to some degree. Now 1 in 8, or almost 80%, find it challenging to work from home. And as we drill into that, we find that there are some subsets that are particularly vulnerable. One group in particular are those who have unmet care needs, either because they were forced to become all of a sudden teachers for their kids, or because they have some other care obligation, a parent, a partner, an adult child, a child with learning disabilities or other challenges. And all of a sudden their support groups have fallen away from them. What we found when we did regression analysis looking for predictors of some negative outcomes like poor mental health or vulnerability to addiction, the single biggest predictor of those negative outcomes was the presence of unmet care needs in the household. And those unmet care needs have gone up 30% since our last survey wave. So there is a raw edge in the workforce in general, and it is extremely acute with people who have extra care responsibilities at home. So that was really a key insight, and we can look at some of the emotions underlying that and other issues. I'd love to do that.
Okay. So again, this is, it's newsworthy. You have the data. It's like, oh, we can't bury our heads under the sand. But I think there are some really positive aspects of this. And again, going back to some of the things and motivations that are all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but have really kind of risen to the top. Personally, I find them very inspiring, that people are kind of finally waking up to the fact that a job is just a job in many cases. And they're looking for a higher purpose. They're looking for higher meaning in there. So talk to me a little bit about how, that played out in the survey and how it compared to others.
Sure. Yeah, it was quite interesting when we first did the first wave of workforce listenings right after COVID. We used a technique that we pioneered called Agile Brain, which is an emotional motivational tool that uses images instead of words to ask questions. And so where I can ask you a standard survey question and you'll think about it and respond on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 equals strongly agree. I think you and I both recognize that that's a very traditional way of doing things, and it's very easy to fake that response. It's a rational response. It doesn't tap into the underlying emotional factors that drive all of our decision making. And neuroscience has told us that emotions matter. So we use images to tied to a prompt in order to get beyond those cognitive filters and really understand what's going on. And what it told us in wave one of workforce listening back at the beginning of the pandemic was that people were seeking safety, caring, a higher purpose. They were wondering about, faced with this existential threat, what their future really, what lay in their future. They weren't thinking about work at all. What's encouraging actually in the data in our latest survey, as we look at it, workforce listening showed a resurgence in focus on issues around success and immersion in work. And so that's partly good news. It says people are, they've figured out how to box a lot of the risk. Vaccinations are coming down the pike. The economy's opening back up. They're wondering how they recoup the lost ground. They've lost revenue. They've lost savings. They may have lost, a car, employment, a home. They've lost a lot. And so they're focusing more on getting back to work. That's the positive here. The negative is they're really, they're, as we said, they've depleted their emotional energy. And so it remains to be seen how companies are going to respond and help, kind of bootstrap back their employees, get them back on a positive track. I hate to be a downer, but it's a challenge. We're not out of the woods on that front.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the telling thing here is that we may be on the road with, like you said, vaccination, economy opening up, but we are emotionally exhausted and drained, and employees are looking everywhere, including their employers, to help them kind of restock, right? And we say employers, but employers are people too. So the managers, the CEO, everybody's in the same proverbial canoe here. I wonder, as we look forward, as we continue to go down this path, and you're going to be doing more of these studies, any particular words of wisdom in terms of what you think will happen and how employers can step up to deliver on some of these issues that have come up through the data?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on the kind of the employer front, when we looked at the data and we asked employees, or the respondents who are all employed for U.S. companies, about their relationship with their employers, it was quite startling. 2 in 5, 40%, don't have trust in senior management in their organizations. And that really spiked around issues of justice and ethics, safety and caring. A lot of those people are on the front lines. A lot of those people are concerned about, being put in harm's way, if you will. But a lot of them also, are seeing CEOs taking home record pay, which was announced in the media just a few days ago. And so there's a real disconnect. Some companies are stepping up, and those companies in our data we saw starting to get some positive marks. We took one little a deep dive on the area of unmet childcare needs, for example. And what we found is that companies that were leaning in, checking regularly on the emotional well-being of their employees in a formal sense, were generating dramatically more positive emotional response from their employees. And that was really encouraging. The ones who weren't were generating negative emotional response for their employees. And where the rubber hits the road is we're seeing fully a third of employees in the survey indicated they were currently actively looking for a new job, a new employer. When we sorted that data by the company's posture, if you will, about emotional well-being. In other words, companies leaning in to emotional well-being and monitoring their employees' health. Those numbers were reasonable. The group that weren't leaning in, the companies that weren't leaning in to monitor and support their employees and their emotional well-being, saw a dramatic spike in distrust, in weakening bond, call it engagement, and finally this metric of actively looking for employees, looking for new employment. So I think the message is clear for employers. Emotions matter. The pandemic has brought that home to roost. It's not going away, and companies need to find new ways to lean in to measuring emotional well-being and acting on it to help their employees.
Yeah, well put, well put. So, I mean, it sounds common sense in a lot of ways, right? You care about your employees, they're going to be more loyal and productive in all the engagement metrics we look at. But here's the data. So if people want to get their hands on more of this really important data, what's the best way for them to do that, John?
Sure. Well, we post it all on our website, which is leadingindicator.com. So encourage people to visit us there. We will be publishing the Workforce Listening 3 study this week during the month of April. So we're excited for that and all the work we continue to do on this subject. I really appreciate the time with you and getting the word out.
Yeah, keep up the great work. We got to bring more humanity to the world and certainly in the workforce. So thank you so much for that, John. And for all our listeners, thanks for being here.
All right. Take care, Alyssa.
Thanks.